Imagine the unthinkable, a child declared dead not once, but 3 times, miraculously opens its eyes again. When it comes back, it doesn't just bring a second chance to live. It carries a message so profound and surprising that it seems from a place beyond our earthly existence. London Flea is a boy who came back from the dead. He had a powerful revelation, claiming to have seen Jesus and hearing from him. This is a story that will challenge your beliefs about life after death. If you've ever questioned the existence of an afterlife or wondered what happens when we die, this story may hold the answers you've been looking for. Get ready to embark on a journey that defies logic. It shatters doubts and directly touches the heart of a divine mystery. If there really is a place beyond this life and someone could come back to tell us about it, and if that person was a child with no reason to invent such a story, London's testimony offers us a chance to explore these questions. Some might dismiss stories like his as fantasies or hallucinations, but the clarity and detail he presents suggest something much more serious. Words challenge us to reconsider what we think we know about life and death. It all began on an ordinary Sunday in 1997. The Flea family, like many others, valued their time together at weekends. Words challenge us to reconsider what we think we know about life and death. It all began on an ordinary Sunday in 1997. The Flea family, like many others, valued their time together at weekends. On that Sunday, the routine was simple and comforting, a morning at church followed by a quiet drive back home where they had lunch and spent the rest of the day relaxing. But that Sunday was destined to be anything but ordinary. Julie Flea, a devoted mother, was chatting casually with her husband, Andy, as they drove by the relatives. Little Lon, absent-mindedly watched the landscape out of the window, completely oblivious to the events that would change his life forever. Julie and Andy were on their way to church, and little Lon was in the back seat, minding his own business. They were a devoted couple, and they had a son, but that Sunday was going to change everything. Subscribe to the channel and notifications to hear more stories like this. We want to share more inspiring stories full of hope with you. Remember that there is much more than we can see. Join this community and help spread this message of faith and love. It was a beautiful Sunday, and the sun was shining brightly. It cast a golden light inside the car, creating an atmosphere of peace and routine. Julie could never have imagined that these would be her last moments with her family. The serenity of the day and the comfort of family rituals were about to be violently interrupted. The silence was suddenly shattered by the sound of a siren. An ambulance was at the crossroads ahead. The driver had no time to react. The impact was devastating. The siren sounded as the ambulance crossed the crossroads ahead. The car lost control, and the impact was devastating. Metal crunched and glass broke as the car tore through the causeway. The car finally stopped in the middle of a quiet day. A deafening silence hung over the scene, only broken by the growing sound of sirens approaching in the distance. First responders arrived, and it was clear the accident was serious. The family's vehicle was almost unrecognizable after the collision. Inside, Fly was trapped and could not resist the injuries. He lost his life. Wreckage, but she's alive. Rescuers are working frantically to pull her out of the twisted wreckage. They're focusing on the small, mobile body of London in the back seat. He's not breathing. Paramedics are rushing him to the nearest hospital. Paramedics rushed him to the nearest hospital, struggling to keep him alive. His pulse was almost non-existent, signs that his body was collapsing. Collapse. Despite the medical team's efforts, the unthinkable happened. London was declared clinically dead. The team tried everything to revive him, but there was no answer. It seemed that his time on Earth had ended before it had really begun. Meanwhile, July was still struggling against her own injuries. She received the devastating news of her husband's death. The weight of her grief hit her like a physical blow. Amidst her thoughts about London, she held fast to a fragile hope. She had hope that he might survive. Despite the doctor's warnings, she refused to give up. In the operating room, the battle for London's life continued. His heart stopped twice more, and twice the doctors managed to bring him back. Each time his heart stopped, it was as if he was closer to the edge of another world, suspended between life and death, pulled by invisible forces. The medical team worked tirelessly, faces expressing a mixture of concentration and quiet desperation, doing everything they could to keep him anchored to the world of the living. Julie prayed with despair, fear and pain. Her prayers were not just words, her words were not just words. They were anguished cries from the depths of her soul. They begged God to spare her son's life. At that moment, she felt her faith being tested like never before. She had already lost her husband, and now she was on the verge of losing her only son. Her prayers were not just words. They were anguished cries from the depths of her soul, begging God to spare her son's life. At that moment, she felt her faith being tested like never before. She had already lost her husband, and now she was on the verge of losing her only son. She whispered, "Please, God. Please don't take him to the doctors." The situation was critical, and they knew that time was running out. Lon's chances of survival were slim, and even if he resisted, they feared he would suffer severe brain damage. How could a child survive after being declared dead for 3 days without profound consequences? They prepared Julie for the seemingly inevitable. If London woke up, he would no longer be the same boy. Despite the bleak outlook, Julie refused to surrender to the despair in her heart. She believed that her son's spirit was stronger than his frail body. She was certain that he would return as the boy she had always loved, not as a shadow of himself. The days turned into weeks while London remained in an unconscious coma, hooked up to machines that kept his body alive. Julie never left his side, holding his hand as if only her touch could bring him back from the abyss. The medical team monitored him, their faces reflecting the reality they had already witnessed in similar cases. Coma patients often faced sad outcomes, and London's condition offered little reason for optimism. London's story was unique. He lay motionless, surrounded by the beeps of the machines that filled the hospital room. The sound of the machines was mechanical, a faint echo of hope in the midst of uncertainty. London's body remained motionless, but his consciousness was far from inert. He would later describe the experience as a detachment of his spirit, freeing himself from the bonds of his physical form and leaving the hospital bed behind. He found himself in an indescribable realm. London's body remained motionless, but his consciousness was far from inert. He described the experience as a detachment of his spirit, freeing himself from the bonds of his physical form and leaving the hospital bed behind. He found himself in an indescribable realm of light and peace, so serene that it seemed like a dream, but more vivid and real than anything he had ever known. In this place, his senses were heightened in unimaginable ways. The colors were richer and brighter, and the sounds blended together in a harmony so perfect that it seemed otherworldly. It enveloped him, calming every fiber of his being. He knew he had crossed into heaven. He remembered with clarity paths paved with gold, shining with a light of their own. The air shimmered with an ethereal glow that infused everything with warmth and love. As he walked through this heavenly landscape, London saw figures bathed in a soft golden light. These figures were not strangers, although he didn't immediately recognize all the faces. He felt an inexplicable connection with them. He soon understood the truth. He was surrounded by relatives who had died long before his birth. Revelation was impressive, but it also seemed natural, as if he had always known of their existence. These figures were two small children who greeted him with warm, loving smiles. London couldn't identify them. Their presence brought him immense comfort and a feeling of familiarity. Later, he discovered their identity. They were brothers he never met, the children Julie had lost before he was born. Losses about which she had never spoken. London had no way of knowing about them, and yet there they were, embracing with love and unconditional love. A gathering of radiant souls appeared, and the light emanating from this figure was so intense that it overshadowed everything around. London knew immediately who it was, Jesus. His presence was overwhelming, not in a frightening way. The gathering of radiant souls was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a figure whose light was so intense that it overshadowed everything around. London recognized immediately who it was, Jesus. His presence was overwhelming, not in a frightening or scary way, but with an all-encompassing love that made London cry. All earthly pain melted away under the compassionate gaze of Jesus. Jesus did not speak in the conventional sense, he resonated directly in London's soul. The message was clear and unforgettable: it's not your time yet. You have a mission to fulfill. You must return to earth and share this message. Heaven is real, and life continues beyond death. Each person has a divine purpose. Although the peace and love of heaven were so comforting that London didn't want to leave, he understood the gravity of what Jesus asked of him. He knew he had to go back, even if it meant returning to the world of pain and suffering. In an instant, the vision disappeared, and he felt an invisible force pull him back. He felt as if he were passing through a tunnel of light and warmth. Finally, his eyes opened, and the fluorescent lights of the hospital room greeted him. London had returned not only to life, but with a purpose that would shape the rest of his existence. Doctors and nurses rushed to his side. He knew he had to go back, even if it meant returning to the world of pain and suffering. In an instant, the vision disappeared, and he felt an invisible force pull him back. He felt himself pass through a tunnel of light and warmth until finally his eyes opened. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room greeted him. London had returned not only to life, but with a purpose that would shape the rest of his existence. Doctors and nurses rushed to his side. Their faces showed amazement and disbelief after everything his body had endured after being declared dead 3 times. London wasn't just alive, he was awake, alert, and talking. When the medical team began their assessments, prepared to find signs of cognitive damage or memory loss, London defied all expectations. He immediately recognized her mother, squeezing her hand with a strength that contradicted her. Julie cried non-stop. Their faces showed a mix of amazement and disbelief. After everything his body had endured, London wasn't just alive, he was awake, alert, and talking. When the medical team began their assessments, they were prepared to find signs of cognitive damage or memory loss. But London defied all expectations. He immediately recognized his mother, squeezing her hand with a strength that contradicted her. Overwhelmed by the realization that her prayers had been answered, Julie cried non-stop. Her son had returned, not as a reduced version of himself, but as the boy she had always known and loved. The journey back to life was not without challenges, but London's determination was unwavering. He had seen the face of Jesus, felt the embrace of heaven, and now carried the weight of a mission he was ready to fulfill. His story was just beginning, and the message he brought would touch the lives of countless people. It was nothing short of a miracle. Julie had a hard time understanding it, but she was grateful for it. After weeks of silence, London spoke. His voice was weak, but his words were powerful. He described his experiences in vivid detail, painting a picture of streets, golden streets, angelic figures, and in London mentioned meeting his 2 brothers, and that left Julie speechless. Julie struggled to understand, but she was grateful. After weeks of silence, London spoke, his voice weak but his words powerful. He described his experiences vividly, painting a picture of golden streets, angelic figures, and more. What left Julie speechless was when London mentioned his two brothers. He spoke of their appearances and the loving way they. Julie's heart almost stopped. She had never shared the painful story of her miscarriage with London. Miscarriages were a secret she had chosen to keep. How could he know? Yet here he was, recounting his brothers with a certainty that defied explanation. This realization left her shaken and amazed at the same time. What he was not just a story, it was beyond her comprehension. It resonated with a truth impossible to deny. The medical team listened in silence, astonished. They had already witnessed patients who reported near-death experiences, but nothing like this. London about events and people he could not possibly know raised more questions than answers. Scientifically, it was impossible to explain what he was describing, but it was undeniable that something extraordinary had happened to Julie. That moment was a storm of conflicting emotions. She was immensely happy that her son had survived and grateful for the miraculous message he brought. The loss of her husband, Andy, weighed heavily on her heart. Gentle man, he was a loving father, and his absence left a void that not even a miracle could fill. Julie tried to reconcile her gratitude with the loss. As London's recovery defied all medical expectations, he regained his strength at an impressive speed, faster than anyone had anticipated. Despite the severity of his injuries, his mind remained as sharp as ever. While his body underwent surgeries and therapies, London was focused on something greater: sharing. What began as private with his family soon expanded to medical friends and even curious visitors. London spoke with a conviction that transcended his age, as if he had acquired a wisdom beyond his earthly experience. His story spread quickly of his miraculous survival, and his vision of heaven began to attract people who sought him out not just out of curiosity, but in search of hope, answers or peace for their own lives. London did not present himself as someone with all the answers. After all, he was still just a child, but his serene and sincere demeanor brought comfort to those who heard him. He shared the message that Jesus had entrusted to him: believe, have faith, and understand that death is not the end. London described heaven as a place so full of love and light that words could barely do it justice. He spoke of a realm where we are reunited with those we love, where sadness is replaced by joy, and where every soul finds peace. His testimony offered consolation to those who were mourning. He assured them that their loved ones were safe in a place of infinite love. For London, the experience was both a gift and a responsibility. He knew he had been given a second chance not only to live, but to share what he had seen and felt. He was aware that many could ignore his words or even mock his story, but he accepted this task guided by the purpose that had been entrusted to him. Lon's impact was undeniable. He had a way of connecting with people on an emotional level. He knew he had been given a second chance not only to live, but also to share what he had seen and felt. He accepted this task with a purpose. He was no longer just the boy who had survived a terrible accident. He had become the messenger, a symbol of something much bigger than himself. London spoke in front of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. He always spoke with humility and honesty. He recounted not only the beauty of heaven, but also the pure and unconditional love of Jesus. This love was so great that he often got emotional and moved to tears as he described it. He became a beacon of hope and faith for many who had lost loved ones, offering comfort and the assurance that their loved ones were at peace. Even skeptics, moved by the authenticity of his testimony, began to reconsider their doubts. Lon's impact was undeniable. He had a way of connecting with people on an emotional level. Lon's impact was undeniable. He had a way of connecting with people on an emotional level, offering a glimpse of something beyond the struggles of everyday life. Julie watches her friend with pride and admiration. She had always known Lon was, but she never could have imagined the path his life would take when she saw how Dion's words touched other people. She herself began to find Ca Puao. Her sadness was replaced by a sense of peace. Julie saw purpose not only in London's survival but also in her own pain. She recognized a bigger plan at work. London also felt the change within him. He knew his experience had changed him. It wasn't enough just to live his journey. He needed to live it in a way that reflected the love and light he had witnessed in heaven. Julie saw purpose in London's survival and in her own pain. She recognized a bigger plan at work. London also felt the change within him. His experience had changed him. It wasn't enough to just live his journey. He needed to live it in a way that reflected the love and light he had witnessed in heaven. Purpose reminds people that there is always hope, even in the darkest moments. Not everyone was ready to accept London. Some skeptics questioned the authenticity of his experience. They suggested that his visions were nothing more than the effects of a brain deprived of a hallucination caused by trauma. Trauma pointed to scientific explanations for near-death experiences. Studies linked these phenomena to chemical changes in the brain. Lon's story never wavered. He didn't argue or try to convince anyone. He simply shared what he had seen and felt, letting each person come to their own conclusions. Despite the theories put forward, he didn't argue or try to convince anyone. He faced a storm of emotions. He felt immense gratitude for his son's survival, but he was also tormented by deep sadness and the void left by the loss of Andy. He had been a kind man. For some, golden paths and angelic figures were merely the imaginative creations of a mind trying to process an incomprehensible event. Despite this, Lon's story never wavered. A loving father's absence left a wound that not even a miracle could heal. In moments of loneliness, she faced unanswered questions. Why did God save her son but not her husband? Why was this divine message entrusted to Lon and not to her? She grappled daily with her pain and her faith. But over time, Julie's perspective changed. She came to understand that her anger and confusion were natural parts of the grieving process, but they did not have to define her. London's words often echoed in her mind, especially when he talked about love and the peace she will feel in heaven. Julie found a calm she had never been able to offer herself. She accepted that there was a purpose beyond her comprehension and a reason for events unfolding. Her prayers ceased to be cries of despair and became sincere efforts to connect with the divine in a way she had never experienced before. London's experience opened a door in his heart, allowing him to find comfort in the belief that he was at peace in the place that London had described so vividly. London's road to recovery was far from easy. It was a long and painful process marked by physiotherapy, surgeries, and moments of intense frustration. His body bore constant scars from the accident, reminders of the trauma he had faced. London's experience opened a door in his heart, allowing him to find comfort in the belief that he was at peace in the place that London had described so vividly. London's road to recovery was far from easy. It was a long and painful process marked by physiotherapy, surgeries, and moments of intense frustration. His body bore constant scars from the accident, reminders of the trauma he had faced. Yet London faced these challenges with a quiet that seemed almost supernatural. His resilience and courage seemed to come from a place beyond this world. He never complained about pain or hardship. Instead, he focused on the mission he believed had been entrusted to him, to share his story and spread a message of hope. Over the years, London's reach grew. London grew. He was no longer just a boy who had survived a terrible accident. He became a messenger, a symbol of something much greater than himself. He traveled to churches, schools, and conferences, often speaking to hundreds or even thousands of people with humility and sincerity. He narrated his experience not to glorify himself, but to inspire others. He spoke not only about the beauty of heaven, but also about the pure and unconditional love that he would feel from Jesus. He was moved to tears whenever he described this love to others. London became a beacon of hope and faith. His story offered solace to the grieving, assuring them that their loved ones were in a place of peace. Even skeptics began to question their doubts. The authenticity and emotion of London's testimony resonated deeply with people. London's story tapped into a universal yearning for proof that life has meaning beyond our daily struggles. July watched her son with pride and admiration. She had always known Lon was special, but she could never have imagined the extraordinary life he would lead when she saw how Lon's words brought healing and hope to others. July watched her son with pride and admiration. Lon was special, she had always known it. She could never have imagined the extraordinary life he would lead when she saw how Lon's words brought healing and hope to others. She felt her own pain begin to soften, little by little. Her sadness was replaced by a sense of peace. She began to see a greater purpose even in the midst of her loss. Through London, she came to understand that even pain could be part of something meaningful for Lon. The experience transformed him. He fully embraced his mission, understanding that it wasn't just about telling his story. Her pain softened little by little. Her sadness gave way to a sense of peace. She found a greater purpose, even in the midst of her loss. Through London, she came to understand that pain could be part of something meaningful. He embraced his mission, understanding that it wasn't just about telling his story, but about reflecting the love and light he had experienced in heaven. He became a bridge between two worlds, carrying a message of peace and love from one to the other. London knew that as long as he had breath in his body, he would continue to share his story and fulfill the mission that Jesus had given him. London's story wasn't just about the boy who came back from the brink of death, it was about the message he carried that transcends time and space. Testimony touched the essence of what it means to be human. London's words remind us that we are part of something much greater than ourselves. Those who listen closely to London's words can transform the way they see life, death, and everything in between. This message has touched your heart. Like the video and share it with your loved ones. Someone you know may need to hear these words today. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so we can continue exploring inspiring stories of faith, hope, and purpose together. Your